November 12, 1942. Reich Air Ministry Intelligence Section, Berlin. Oberst Heinrich von Rittberg set down the decoded message from Abwehr Agent 37 operating in Detroit with hands that trembled slightly despite 3 decades of military service. The report described something that violated every principle of aircraft manufacturing his engineers understood. A factory building bombers on an assembly line like automobiles. 4-engine strategic bombers, each containing over 1.5 million individual parts, rolling off a production line every single hour. Von Rittberg had spent the previous night reviewing technical specifications of the American B-24 Liberator. The aircraft weighed 65,000 pounds, fully loaded. Its 4 Pratt and Whitney engines generated 5,600 horsepower combined. The fuselage stretched 67 feet with a wingspan of 110 feet. German intelligence possessed detailed photographs captured from downed aircraft, showing the complexity of its construction. B-24 hydraulic systems, electrical wiring, defensive armament consisting of 1050 caliber machine guns, sophisticated bomb release mechanisms, and navigation equipment that required precision assembly. Building such an aircraft required thousands of man-hours according to German aviation industry standards. Messerschmitt needed approximately 15,000 man-hours to complete a single Me-109 fighter, a much simpler aircraft than any 4-engine bomber. The Heinkel He 111 medium bomber, far less complex than the B-24, required 22,000 man-hours. Yet this American report claimed Ford Motor Company was producing B-24s in assembly line fashion at a rate of 1 per hour once the factory reached full production. Von Rittberg walked to the map room where his staff had been tracking American industrial capacity since 1940. The wall displayed a map of the United States, marked with red pins indicating confirmed aircraft factories. Boeing in Seattle producing B-17 Flying Fortresses. Douglas Aircraft in California manufacturing various types. Consolidated Aircraft in San Diego building B-24s using traditional methods. But this new facility represented something unprecedented. The Americans called it Willow Run, built by Ford Motor Company on farmland outside Detroit. The initial intelligence reports arriving in spring 1941 had described plans for an enormous factory. German analysts dismissed these as typical American exaggeration. Every nation engaged in propaganda about their production capabilities, but subsequent reports throughout 1941 and into 1942 provided increasingly disturbing details. Aerial reconnaissance photographs smuggled out through neutral countries showed a building of staggering dimensions. Construction photographs revealed a structure 3.5 million square feet under a single roof. The main assembly line, according to multiple independent sources, stretched nearly 1 mile in length. Hauptmann Friedrich Steiner, von Rittberg's chief technical analyst, had calculated the implications. If the Americans actually achieved their stated production goals, this single factory would produce more 4-engine bombers monthly than Germany's entire aviation industry produced in a year. The mathematics seemed impossible. Steiner had worked in German aircraft manufacturing before joining military intelligence. He understood every aspect of bomber construction from his years at Junkers. The complexity began with raw materials. A single B-24 required 15 tons of aluminum, 3 tons of steel, half a ton of copper, and hundreds of pounds of rubber. The Americans would need to deliver these materials in continuous streams to support high-volume production. German factories struggled with material shortages constantly. How could the Americans maintain such supply flows while simultaneously fighting a 2-ocean war? Then came component manufacturing. Each bomber contained 4 engines, each engine consisting of thousands of precisely machined parts. Propellers had to be manufactured and balanced. Landing gear required heavy forgings and hydraulic systems. Wings incorporated fuel tanks holding thousands of gallons. The fuselage demanded precision metalwork, to maintain aerodynamic efficiency. Defensive gun turrets needed complex electromechanical systems. Bomb racks required precise engineering to safely release heavy ordnance. Assembly presented even greater challenges. Coordinating the arrival of hundreds of thousands of components so they reached the assembly line at precisely the right moment required logistics beyond anything German industry had achieved. Yet according to these reports, Ford had created exactly such a system. The company had broken the B-24's construction into 5 major sub-assemblies, manufactured simultaneously on separate production lines that converged on the final assembly line with perfect timing. Von Rittberg studied the architectural drawings his agents had obtained. The factory's L-shaped design stretched 5,600 feet along one axis and 1,500 feet along the other. The building consumed enough steel for 3 battleships. Its heating system was the largest ever installed in an American factory. The electrical system delivered enough power for a city of 50,000 people. Concrete foundations extended 30 feet underground to support overhead cranes capable of lifting entire aircraft sections. The workforce projections seemed equally fantastic. Ford planned to employ 42,000 workers at peak production. German intelligence knew from census data that Detroit's population was approximately 1.5 million. Ford intended to employ nearly 3% of the city's entire population in a single factory. Where would such workers come from? What training would they receive? How could 42,000 people coordinate their efforts efficiently? More troubling still were reports about the workforce composition. Agent 37 reported that Ford was hiring women for precision assembly work. German aviation industry relied on skilled male craftsmen who had trained for years. The idea that housewives could build strategic bombers seemed absurd, yet the reports insisted that women were not only employed but excelling at certain tasks requiring manual dexterity and attention to detail. By December 1942, von Rittberg's intelligence section had accumulated enough data to brief Reich Marshal Hermann Göring directly. The presentation took place in Göring's opulent office at the Air Ministry. Von Rittberg brought his most experienced analysts, including Steiner and Major Kurt Zimmer, who had spent a decade in the United States before the war as an aviation attaché. Göring listened with visible skepticism as von Rittberg presented the findings. The factory's dimensions, the projected production rates, the workforce size, the assembly line methodology. When von Rittberg finished, Göring leaned back in his chair and laughed. A genuine belly laugh that his staff had learned meant he considered something utterly ridiculous. The Americans are desperate if they believe we will accept such obvious propaganda, Göring declared. Building bombers like automobiles, it is technically impossible. An automobile has perhaps 5,000 parts. A bomber has hundreds of thousands. The precision required is completely different. This Ford is a charlatan trying to steal government money with impossible promises. Major Zimmer attempted to interject that Henry Ford's son Edsel Ford was overseeing the project and that Charles Sorensen, Ford's production genius, had personally designed the manufacturing process. Göring waved him off dismissively. Even if they build this enormous factory, they will discover that aircraft cannot be mass-produced like cars. They will produce defective aircraft that fall from the sky, or they will produce nothing at all, and we will laugh at their wasted billions. Von Rittberg left the meeting troubled. Göring's certainty seemed to exceed the available evidence. More concerning, Göring had ordered intelligence resources redirected away from monitoring American production toward what he considered more immediate threats. Von Rittberg's section would continue tracking Willow Run, but with reduced priority and fewer agents assigned to the task. Through early 1943, reports from multiple sources confirmed that Willow Run had begun production. The first completed B-24, serial number 41-11503, rolled out in September 1942. This aircraft required complete disassembly and rebuilding due to quality control failures, validating Göring's skepticism about assembly line aircraft production. Subsequent aircraft in October and November also required extensive rework. But by January 1943, something changed. The quality control problems diminished rapidly. Ford's engineers had identified bottlenecks and implemented solutions. Tooling improved. Worker training programs bore fruit. Most significantly, the sub-assembly lines achieved synchronization. Wings, fuselages, tail sections, and engine installations converged on the final assembly line with increasing precision. February production reached 31 bombers. Still far below projections, but the trajectory was unmistakable. March production increased to 75 aircraft. April brought 104 B-24s from a factory that critics had mocked as "will it run?" The skepticism that had seemed so justified 6 months earlier was evaporating before an avalanche of actual production. Von Rittberg's technical analysts struggled to explain how Ford had solved problems German engineers considered insurmountable. The key appeared to be something Americans called interchangeable parts manufacturing. German aircraft production relied heavily on skilled craftsmen who hand-fitted components. Each Messerschmitt or Focke-Wulf contained parts that were unique to that specific aircraft, filed and adjusted to fit during assembly. The craftsmanship produced excellent aircraft but prevented true mass production. Ford had insisted on tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch across hundreds of thousands of components. Every rivet hole had to align perfectly between parts manufactured in different buildings by different workers. Every hydraulic fitting had to connect without adjustment. Every electrical connector had to mate on first attempt. Achieving this required precision tooling and quality control beyond anything German industry had implemented. The Americans had also revolutionized tooling itself. German workers used general-purpose machine tools that required skilled operators to set up for each operation. Ford designed specialized tools for specific operations on specific parts. A worker with minimal training could operate these dedicated machines, producing parts that met specifications consistently. The upfront investment in tooling was enormous, but once installed, the system produced components faster and more accurately than skilled craftsmen ever could. Hauptmann Steiner obtained a smuggled copy of Ford's training manual for new workers. The document revealed an approach to manufacturing that challenged German assumptions about industrial work. Where German factories expected years of apprenticeship before workers could touch aircraft components, Ford's system broke each job into simple tasks that could be learned in hours or days. A new worker wasn't trained to build a bomber. They were trained to install a specific bracket, or drill specific holes, or connect specific wires. This division of labor enabled Ford to hire virtually anyone. Women who had never worked outside the home became precision assemblers. Teenagers fresh out of high school operated complex machinery. Elderly workers retired from other industries found roles requiring experience but not physical strength. The diversity of the workforce actually became an advantage. Different perspectives identified problems and solutions that homogeneous groups missed. By summer 1943, von Rittberg could no longer dismiss Willow Run's achievement. June production reached 225 bombers. July brought 314. The factory was approaching the seemingly impossible goal of 1 bomber per hour. More alarming still, intelligence reports indicated these aircraft were not shoddily built assembly line trash, as Göring had predicted. American pilots praised the B-24's ruggedness and reliability. Luftwaffe pilots who examined captured examples noted high-quality construction and advanced systems. The strategic implications crystallized when von Rittberg's staff calculated comparative production rates. In July 1943, Willow Run alone produced more four-engine bombers than Germany's entire aviation industry. This single American factory, built in open farmland where cows had grazed 2 years earlier, was outproducing the combined efforts of Messerschmitt, Focke-Wulf, Heinkel, Dornier, and Junkers. But Willow Run represented only one element of American production. Boeing was producing 300 B-17 Flying Fortresses monthly at its Seattle plant. Douglas Aircraft manufactured hundreds of transport aircraft. North American Aviation was building P-51 Mustang fighters at extraordinary rates. Consolidated San Diego plant continued producing B-24s using traditional methods. When von Rittberg's analysts totaled American aircraft production across all manufacturers, the numbers became apocalyptic for German air defense. The United States was producing 8,000 to 9,000 military aircraft monthly by mid-1943. Germany, at peak efficiency, produced approximately 1,500 aircraft monthly, including all types from trainers to fighters to bombers. The Americans were building 6 times more aircraft while simultaneously supplying the Soviet Union through Lend-Lease, maintaining forces in the Pacific Theater, and stockpiling reserves for the anticipated invasion of Europe. Von Rittberg prepared another briefing for Göring in August 1943. This time he brought captured American aircraft production statistics published openly in newspapers and magazines. He brought reconnaissance photographs showing Willow Run's parking lots filled with thousands of workers' automobiles. He brought testimony from Luftwaffe pilots who had encountered wave after wave of American bombers. The evidence had become overwhelming. Göring's reaction revealed a man confronting the collapse of his worldview. He accused American newspapers of lying. He insisted reconnaissance photographs must be fabricated or mislabeled. He claimed Luftwaffe pilots were exaggerating enemy numbers to excuse their own failures. When von Rittberg presented production data from neutral Swedish observers who had toured American factories, Göring dismissed them as duped by elaborate deceptions. The Reich Marshal's denial stemmed partly from recognition that accepting these figures meant accepting Germany's inevitable defeat. If America could produce 8,000 aircraft monthly while Germany managed 1,500, the mathematics of attrition warfare became inescapable. Germany could not win a production race against such overwhelming industrial superiority. Every experienced pilot shot down was irreplaceable, while American training programs graduated thousands of new pilots monthly. But Göring's denial also reflected deeper Nazi ideology that simply couldn't accommodate American achievement. The racial theories that underpinned National Socialism insisted that mongrel democracies lacked the discipline and unity to accomplish great tasks. American society's diversity, its mixture of ethnicities and races, was supposed to be a fatal weakness. Yet that very diversity had become strength at places like Willow Run, where workers from dozens of backgrounds cooperated to achieve what homogeneous German workforce could not match. Through fall 1943, Willow Run's production continued accelerating. September brought 365 bombers. October reached 405. November production was 396, with a slight decrease due to model changeovers and modifications. Then, in December, Willow Run produced 364 B-24s while implementing 527 separate design changes requested by combat crews based on operational experience. This ability to incorporate battlefield feedback while maintaining production proved as significant as the production volume itself. German aircraft manufacturers required months to implement design changes. Modifying production tooling meant stopping assembly lines and retooling equipment. The delays meant German aircraft rarely received improvements requested by combat pilots. American manufacturers had designed flexibility into their production systems. Willow Run could implement certain changes within weeks without halting production. The B-24 variants rolling off Willow Run's line in late 1943 differed substantially from the early production models. Combat experience had revealed vulnerabilities that Ford's engineers addressed systematically. Fuel tank protection improved, defensive armament increased, bomb release mechanisms became more reliable, navigation equipment grew more sophisticated. Each improvement required retooling some portion of the production line, yet overall output continued growing. January 1944 brought the breakthrough that German intelligence had hoped would never occur. Willow Run produced 428 B-24 Liberators that month. With a 31-day month, this averaged one bomber every 63 minutes around the clock. Ford had achieved the impossible production rate that Göring had mocked 2 years earlier. A complete 4-engine strategic bomber containing 1.5 million parts emerged from the factory more than 23 times daily. Von Rittberg's intelligence section documented how Ford had accomplished this feat. The factory operated 3 shifts covering 24 hours daily. The workforce had reached its peak of approximately 42,000, including support personnel. The supply chain delivered components from 1,200 suppliers across multiple states with precision that ensured parts arrived at assembly stations exactly when needed. The sub-assembly system had achieved remarkable efficiency. One production line manufactured wing sections, another built fuselages, a third produced tail assemblies, a fourth handled engine installation. Each sub-assembly line operated independently but synchronized perfectly with the main assembly line. When a fuselage reached the point where wings should be attached, the wings arrived within minutes. When engines were needed, engine installations appeared precisely on schedule. Overhead cranes moved massive components that would require dozens of workers to position manually. Jigs and fixtures ensured precise alignment of parts. Specialized tools eliminated hand-fitting. Coordinated teams of workers performed specific tasks at each station as the growing aircraft moved steadily down the mile-long assembly line. The entire process resembled a precisely choreographed dance involving thousands of participants. Ford had also revolutionized logistics beyond the factory walls. Railroad tracks connected Willow Run directly to America's rail network. Trains delivered raw materials and components continuously. A dedicated airfield adjacent to the factory allowed completed bombers to take off directly for modification centers, where military equipment was installed before delivery to combat units. The entire system from raw materials to combat-ready aircraft achieved efficiency that German industrial planners considered theoretically impossible. The human element proved as significant as the mechanical systems. Ford's worker training programs had evolved into remarkably effective operations. New employees received structured instruction that could transform someone who had never seen an aircraft into a productive assembler within days. Experienced workers mentored newcomers. Supervisors encouraged suggestions for improvements regardless of who proposed them. Women comprised over half of Willow Run's workforce by 1944. They excelled at tasks requiring manual dexterity, such as installing electrical systems and hydraulic lines. Female inspectors achieved lower defect rates than their male predecessors. Women operated cranes and drove forklifts and performed welding. The gender integration that Nazi ideology insisted would produce chaos instead generated efficiency that exceeded all male German factories. African American workers found opportunities at Willow Run unavailable elsewhere in 1940s America. Though segregation and discrimination persisted, the desperate need for workers created openings that slowly eroded racial barriers. Black workers operated machinery, assembled components, and performed skilled tasks. Their presence challenged racial assumptions in ways that would ripple through American society long after the war ended. The implications for Germany's strategic situation became undeniable by spring 1944. American bomber formations over Europe grew larger week by week. The 8th Air Force could dispatch 1,000 bombers on a single mission by March 1944. These raids arrived with fighter escorts possessing enough range to protect bombers all the way to Berlin and back. The P-51 Mustangs accompanying bomber streams came from North American aviation factories, producing 500 monthly. Luftwaffe fighter pilots faced impossible mathematics. Germany was producing approximately 1,000 fighters monthly by early 1944. Combat losses, training accidents, and operational attrition consumed more than production could replace. Experienced pilots were dying faster than training programs could graduate replacements. Meanwhile, American fighter production exceeded 2,000 monthly. American pilot training graduated thousands of fully qualified aviators each month. The Americans could afford losses that would cripple German air defense. Von Rittberg's intelligence section calculated that bombing campaign effectiveness was becoming irrelevant to strategic outcome. Even if the Luftwaffe achieved favorable loss ratios, American production advantages meant the Allies would win through attrition alone. Every German fighter shot down was effectively irreplaceable, while American losses were replaced within days. Every German pilot killed represented years of training investment lost, while American training pipelines produced unlimited replacements. The psychological impact on German aviation industry leaders was devastating. Men who had built careers on aircraft manufacturing expertise confronted the reality that their skills and knowledge mattered less than American organizational capability and industrial scale. German engineers could design superior aircraft and often did. The Me-262 jet fighter was genuinely revolutionary, but Germany couldn't produce enough Me-262s to matter strategically, while America buried the Luftwaffe under conventional aircraft produced in crushing numbers. Reich, Minister of Armaments, Albert Speer visited several German aircraft factories in spring 1944 and returned deeply disturbed. He reported to Hitler that the German aviation industry was doing everything possible within available resources, but simply couldn't compete with American scale. Speer estimated American aviation production exceeded German output by 6-1 in numbers, and even more in terms of useful capability, since American aircraft were often larger and more capable than German equivalents. Hitler responded with characteristic denial mixed with rage. He blamed sabotage, blamed insufficient worker dedication, blamed defeatist thinking. He ordered increased production through willpower and harsh penalties for failure. None of this changed fundamental reality. Germany lacked the aluminum, the rubber, the copper, the skilled workers, and the production facilities to match American output. No amount of Hitler's fury could conjure resources that didn't exist. By June 1944, when Allied forces landed at Normandy, Willow Run had produced over 6,000 B-24 Liberators. This single factory's output exceeded the entire German four-engine bomber production for the war. The Normandy invasion benefited directly from Willow Run's production, with hundreds of B-24s supporting the landings, bombing transportation networks, and attacking German positions. German defenders at Normandy faced an enemy who could lose equipment at rates that would bankrupt any European military and simply order replacements. An American tank destroyed meant a new tank arrived within days. An aircraft shot down meant a replacement appeared almost immediately. This sustainability of losses meant Allied forces could take risks and accept casualties that German commanders couldn't contemplate because their losses were permanent. Von Rittberg spent the summer of 1944 documenting Willow Run's continued production growth for archives that he increasingly suspected would be read by Allied intelligence officers after Germany's defeat. July production reached 438 bombers. August brought 442. The factory's efficiency continued improving even as it approached theoretical maximum capacity. Worker experience accumulated, processes refined, quality improved, while quantity increased. The intelligence reports described innovations that German industry couldn't replicate, even if given detailed specifications. Ford had developed methods for aluminum welding that produced stronger joints with less skilled labor. They had created specialized tools that cost tens of thousands of dollars each, but paid for themselves within months through improved productivity. They had implemented statistical quality control that caught defects before they reached final assembly, reducing rework and scrap. Perhaps most frustrating for German observers was Ford's approach to continuous improvement. American manufacturers treated current production methods as temporary arrangements to be refined constantly. German industry achieved a production configuration and tried to maintain it unchanged to avoid disruption. Ford's engineers made hundreds of small changes monthly, each one slightly improving efficiency or quality. The cumulative effect of these incremental improvements was revolutionary advancement that occurred almost invisibly. By fall 1944, von Rittberg's intelligence section was documenting not just Willow Run, but the entire American industrial mobilization. The production statistics defied comprehension. America was building 1 merchant ship per day, 1 aircraft carrier per month, 8,000 aircraft monthly, hundreds of thousands of vehicles, millions of tons of ammunition, all while maintaining civilian consumption levels that exceeded German pre-war prosperity. The secret lay not in any single factory, but in systematic integration across thousands of facilities. Raw material producers supplied component manufacturers who delivered to assembly plants with coordination that minimized inventory and maximized efficiency. The steel produced in Pittsburgh became aluminum in Cleveland, which became aircraft parts in Detroit, which became completed bombers within weeks. Information flowed through the system as efficiently as materials, with production schedules coordinated nationwide. American transportation infrastructure supported this industrial miracle. Railroad networks moved freight efficiently. Highway systems enabled trucking on scales impossible in Europe. Ports handled cargo with mechanization that doubled European productivity. Communications networks transmitted orders and information instantly. The entire continental economy functioned as a single integrated production system. German industry, by contrast, operated as disconnected islands of production. Transportation networks crumbled under Allied bombing. Communications depended on telephone lines easily severed. Coordination between facilities was difficult even in peacetime and became nearly impossible under wartime conditions. Each factory struggled to source materials and deliver products largely independently. The total production was far less than the sum of individual capabilities. By December 1944, Willow Run's total production exceeded 8,000 B-24 Liberators. Ford had delivered more 4-engine bombers than any other manufacturer in human history. The factory that Göring had dismissed as impossible propaganda had become the symbol of American industrial supremacy. Each bomber carried Ford's achievement to German skies, where they demonstrated that democracy's arsenal could bury dictatorship under steel and high explosives. Von Rittberg prepared a final assessment in January 1945 as Soviet forces approached from the east and Allied armies closed from the west. The report documented how thoroughly German intelligence had underestimated American industrial capability and the fatal consequences of that miscalculation. Germany had entered war assuming American democracy's inefficiency and diversity would prevent effective mobilization. Instead, those very characteristics had generated strengths that crushed German industrial output. The diversity of American workforce at Willow Run brought perspectives and innovations that homogeneous German factories lacked. Women's integration generated insights about ergonomics and efficiency that male engineers had missed. Racial integration, despite its limitations, introduced ideas from multiple communities. Immigrant workers brought experience from different industrial traditions. This diversity of thought accelerated problem-solving and innovation beyond what any racially pure workforce could achieve. Democratic governance that Nazis considered weakness had proved remarkably strong when facing existential threat. American workers volunteered for overtime. They bought war bonds financing factory construction. They tolerated rationing and accepted sacrifices, all without coercion or secret police. The unity achieved through voluntary cooperation exceeded anything totalitarian control had accomplished. Free people defending their way of life proved more dedicated than subjects serving a dictator. German aviation industry officials who survived the war and were interviewed later consistently cited American production scale as the decisive factor they couldn't counter. They acknowledged that German engineering often produced superior individual aircraft, but admitted this technical excellence meant nothing against American numbers. One German engineer stated that the war was lost the moment Ford proved bombers could be mass-produced like automobiles, because that demonstration rendered irrelevant everything German aviation industry knew how to do. Reich Marshal Hermann Göring's mockery of American production capabilities in 1940 became one of history's most catastrophic miscalculations. His contempt for democratic industrial potential blinded him to warning signs visible to anyone willing to see objectively. His ideological assumptions about American weakness prevented him from recognizing that diversity and democracy conferred strengths rather than weaknesses. His failure to understand American capability cost Germany any chance of victory. The intelligence analysts like von Rittberg, who tried to warn leadership about American production, faced career consequences for their accuracy. Göring didn't want intelligence that contradicted his beliefs. He wanted confirmation of his assumptions. When reality refused to cooperate and American production exceeded his worst nightmares, Göring blamed the analysts rather than questioning his own judgment. This institutional failure to accept unwelcome intelligence guaranteed Germany would be unprepared for the production war. By the time Germany surrendered in May 1945, Willow Run had produced over 8,500 B-24 Liberators. The factory had achieved production rates that pre-war experts considered physically impossible. It had demonstrated that complex aircraft could be manufactured with assembly line methods. It had proved that diverse workforce could build precision machinery. It had shown that democratic industrial organization could exceed totalitarian control. These lessons shaped post-war industrial development worldwide. When German intelligence analysts first read reports of Ford's plan to build bombers on assembly lines, they confronted information that challenged everything they thought they knew about aircraft manufacturing. They could dismiss those reports as propaganda, as Göring did, or they could accept the evidence and adjust their understanding of what was possible. The analysts who chose evidence over ideology correctly predicted American production would decide the war's outcome. The leaders who chose ideology over evidence led Germany to total defeat. Willow Run's assembly line stretched 1 mile through a factory housing 42,000 workers building bombers containing 1.5 million parts each. Every 63 minutes, another B-24 rolled out to join the armada, burying Germany under American production. The factory that skeptics said couldn't exist became the symbol of democratic industrial might that crushed the 1,000-year Reich in 12 years. And somewhere in the ruins of Berlin, perhaps Oberst Heinrich von Rittberg reflected that his accurate intelligence reports had been dismissed by leaders who preferred comfortable lies to uncomfortable truths, a mistake that cost his nation everything.